Stand before you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. How many of you remember the first time that you drove a car? Yes. Now, this is delightful to me, in part because your reaction is the same as the 8 o'clock crowd. I'm delighted that the kids aren't raising their hands, but more than that, to a person, not only did you raise your hands to indicate that you remember this visceral experience, but you smiled, almost to a person. There's something about driving that evokes a certain joy that we often forget when we're stuck in traffic, but especially that first experience of driving. Now, I mean, growing up in rural Wisconsin, I'll tell you, I had driven lawnmowers and tractors and four-wheelers for a long time, but when I got behind the wheel of an automobile, there was something different about it. And when we went and set out onto the road, there was really something different about it, and I had some surprises, as I think you might have too. Now, I'll say, when you're a new driver, now this is where the children should be listening, often you get feedback from the other people in the car. Now actually, this is funny to those who are here because it's not just as a new driver. All drivers get feedback from the other people in the car. Am I right? I mean, this is something we almost can't help ourselves. Now, I will say new drivers tend to be a little bit more receptive to the feedback than the more seasoned drivers, if you hadn't noticed this. Now, driving, I think, is significant, important to us, maybe particularly in America, because with it comes a certain freedom and capacity to move about and do things. I mean, I grew up, again, in rural Wisconsin. Now, I grew up out in the country, 3 miles from town. So when I had a driver's license, it really did mean freedom in a way that I didn't have before. And I didn't realize how true that was for everybody until later. I was present as my father and my grandmother had to tell my grandfather that he couldn't drive anymore. And the freedom and the attachment to that was pretty readily apparent even as a young person. Now, I think there are some other examples that maybe draw on this power of freedom in the driving. I still remember vividly the first time I rode with Sarah's grandparents, my grandparents-in-law, if you will. And I was actually quite impressed because they were a bit older, and I'd ridden with my grandparents and maybe saw how their driving skills had diminished over time. I rode with my grandma on at least one occasion where she probably should not have, she should not have been driving anymore. It was frightening. And they were both quite good drivers. Now, what really stood out to me, though, was that as Glenn drove the car, Dorothy provided almost constant feedback on various things. Sometimes simple, like, Glenn, turn off your directional. Glenn, your turn signal, it's still, Glenn. Or, you're turning here, don't miss the turn. But that might not surprise you, but Glenn's response surprised me because he didn't argue, he didn't say, I know. He just received it. Well, quietly. He didn't say, yes, dear, either, but... Now, this is in contrast. I commuted for a summer from Suwanee, where I went to seminary, to Chattanooga to do clinical pastoral education. And there was 8 of us, so we split into 2 carpools, so we rotate, and we only had to drive every 4th week, which was fantastic, except for that one of the drivers could never seem to remember where the turn was. Now, that in and of itself was not a problem, but the fact that when we would say, that's your turn, or your turn is coming up, he would always say, I know. Even so, then we'd learn to sit on our hands and zip our lips, and we'd say, that was our turn. And he would still say, I know. I got it, I know. I think, you sure don't know, because we just went, that's like 3 days in a row, dude. Now, these are all maybe relatable experiences, but more than that, I think they really do connect us to what's happening in our gospel lesson this morning. And not just in our gospel. In fact, it occurs several places in Scripture. I think all three of our lessons speak to this notion of authority and understanding and capacity, and sometimes us thinking we know things that maybe we don't know. Now, in Job, it's exhibited because Job has undergone a great deal of suffering, and finally he begins to grumble against the Lord, and the Lord's response is to offer some perspective. Were you there when I laid the foundations of the world? Do you know where the thunder comes from? Do you have understanding of these things? Job's perspective is broadened. Now, I'm a novice at explaining how our minds work and the understanding of knowledge, but if you'll bear with me, I'd like to say that there are at least 4 buckets of knowing for us. So I'd like to offer a brief explanation to say, we know what we know. That part is probably pretty obvious. I know what it's like to be Paul Klitzke. I know that very well. I know what it's like to be the rector of Ascension. I know how to preach, I think, on a good day anyway. I know that I know how to do certain things. And then the next category is there's things that I know I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be a mother. I don't know what it's, my wife is a nurse. I don't have that skill set. I lack a lot of scientific knowledge. And so there's things I know I don't know. And then there's this interesting category. In third place is this category of stuff that I know, but I don't know that I know it. This is harder to describe, of course, but there's stuff that we don't really know that we know it until it comes to life in us. Maybe it's a skill or a leadership attribute that we don't even see coming, but it emerges in a difficult situation, and there it is, and you think, I didn't even know that I knew how to do that. Or it might be more immediate. Maybe you fall off a dock or out of a boat and you learn that you do know how to swim. And then the fourth category is that which we don't even know we don't know. And my hands get bigger for a reason. This is definitely the largest category. The stuff we don't even realize we don't know. I don't know that I don't know this stuff. Now, if we were to characterize these in the same driving imagery that we began with, I would say that the stuff that I know fits in the smallest container. And that's not just because I'm Paul. That's probably true for all of us. So if we were going to carry it forward in the driving analogy, what I know fits in a Fiat. Okay? Maybe not. Maybe we'd have some room left. Maybe we could go to a smart car. And that which I know I don't know is maybe a standard size car. It's a pretty big body of knowledge. I know that I don't know more than I know. And that which I know but I don't realize I know is probably actually a minivan. It's a bigger body of knowledge than the stuff that I know I don't know. I don't always realize it coming in. And then the body of knowledge that I don't even know I don't know is like a fire truck. I mean, this thing is huge, right? I mean, well, maybe it's a bus if we're going to all go with passenger vehicles, but it's enormous. And again, it's not just me. This is for all of us. So I hope that's resonating with you, this imagery. But I think this comes to bear particularly in our gospel lesson as James and John come to Jesus. They come to Jesus with very little understanding of what they don't even know they don't know. It's big and it's wide. They've followed Jesus. They've witnessed the power of Jesus. They have been disciples to this rabbi who has healed and taught with authority, and they want to be near to it, and they want to step into the driver's seat and move forward with this power and authority and do the things. And rightfully, even any disciple of any rabbi at that time would, the rabbi selects people that they believe are capable of stepping in. And later, Jesus even says, you will do the things that I have done and even greater things than these. So it's not that they're not reaching for something that's entirely off base, but Jesus is correcting their misunderstanding. He's trying to offer them some perspective on what they're actually asking for. He's trying to broaden their minds and help them see that which they haven't even considered. He says to them, he's hinting at it, he's gentle. He says, can you drink from the cup that I drink? Can you be baptized with the baptism that I have been baptized into? We can tell that the disciples don't know what they don't know by their response because they're quick to say, yes, yes, I can do these things. As any 15-year-old says, yes, put me behind the wheel, I can do this thing. And indeed they can. And Jesus even affirms, yes, you will drink from the cup, and yes, you will be baptized. But he seeks to broaden their perspective even further, open their minds to the understanding that to truly step into the greatness of the love that God offers us in Jesus doesn't mean grabbing a hold of the power and the authority. Doesn't mean having to drive the car. Doesn't even mean yelling shotgun as you walk out the door. It means being there to open the door for others. It means being there to make sure that others can find their way. It means being servant of all. Jesus comes and drives us through some amazing experiences and sits with us still as we wrestle with what it means to be part of God's creation. As we wrestle with wanting to be in the driver's seat, with wanting power and authority. But Jesus also stands to remind us that we must be servant to others, that we must have ears to hear and hands to serve. Who will you serve this week? What opportunities lay ahead of you that you might model the servitude that Jesus calls us to in this gospel lesson? The opportunities abound. And I hope that as we move forward in faith, trusting that we can be the servant that Christ calls us to be, that as others point out the things that we don't know, that we might have ears to hear them well and slow to say, I know. Because there's a lot that you and I don't know. And sometimes we have to hear the things we already know to be reminded of them. God's love abounds. Know this is true. God's grace is greater than we can ask or imagine. May we seek to be the servants that Christ calls us to be. May we have ears to hear, hands to serve, hearts overflowing with love, and a proclamation of God's kingdom today, tomorrow, forever.